"Don't look, please," said the black woman to the billionaire. Seconds later, he bursts into tears. It happens right outside a courthouse, in front of everyone. A homeless black woman grabs a powerful billionaire and begs him not to turn around. But he does, and the moment he sees her, he breaks down. Years ago, she told a lie in court, a lie that sent an innocent man to prison. But what no one knows is that same lie saved this billionaire's life from a deadly attack. Now she's back, with nothing left, carrying a secret that cost her everything, including her own brother's freedom. As the truth begins to surface, powerful people try to bury it again, and the price of justice becomes dangerously high. Was her lie a sin or an act of faith? And when the truth finally comes out, who will pay the ultimate price for it? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The courthouse stood like a giant block of grey stone, cold and serious, even under a bright morning sky. People moved in and out of its wide doors in a steady stream. Some walked fast, heads down, like they wanted to disappear. Others lingered, talking in sharp whispers. A few stood near the front steps, holding phones up high, hoping to catch a glimpse of someone important. A black SUV rolled to the curb and stopped smooth as silk. The back door opened, and a man stepped out like he belonged to every room he entered. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a dark suit that fit him like it had been made just for him. His tie sat straight. His shoes shined. But there was nothing soft in his face, even though he looked young enough to still be called Sir by people older than him. He had the kind of face you saw on magazine covers, clean-cut, calm, controlled. And yet, when Jonathan Hale took his first step towards the courthouse doors, a small part of him still felt like he was walking into a storm. His security team formed a loose wall around him. 2 men ahead, 2 behind. A 5th one kept to the side, watching the crowd like a hawk. Jonathan didn't ask for this kind of protection. He didn't want to live like a man under threat. But his team insisted. "Just routine," his head of security had said earlier that morning. "You can't be too careful, sir." Jonathan hated that sentence. He hated how normal it sounded. He moved up the steps, eyes forward. Cameras clicked. A reporter called his name. "Mr. Hale, are you still pushing for reform after today's hearing?" Jonathan didn't stop walking. He lifted a hand in a small wave. Not rude, not friendly either. Just enough to keep the noise from getting louder. His lawyer walked beside him, whispering updates about the day's schedule. Jonathan listened and nodded, but his mind kept drifting. It always drifted when he came to places like this. Courthouses, courtrooms, oaths, lies. 10 years ago he had walked into a courthouse much smaller than this one. Back then he wasn't a household name. He wasn't on magazine covers. He wasn't a billionaire with a foundation. He had been a rising businessman with big dreams and sharp enemies. And on that day, something happened that he still couldn't explain. He shook the thought away as he entered the building. Inside, the air smelled like paper and old coffee. The halls were bright, but not warm. People sat on hard benches, waiting for their names to be called. A woman rocked a baby. A man stared at the floor like his shoes were the only thing holding him together. Jonathan passed them all, heading toward a private room where his legal team waited. Today's hearing wasn't about him breaking the law, it was about paperwork. Technical stuff. A complaint filed by a business rival who wanted attention. It was the kind of thing Jonathan handled all the time, and yet his chest still felt tight, like the building itself was watching him. The hearing lasted under an hour. When it ended, Jonathan walked out with his lawyer, his security team close. The moment he stepped outside, the sound hit him again. Traffic, voices, cameras. Sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps. The sky looked too blue for a place like this. Jonathan descended the steps at a steady pace, one hand buttoning his suit jacket out of habit. He kept his gaze forward. A reporter called again. "Mr. Hale, are you running for office next year?" Jonathan's mouth twitched. He wasn't running for anything except peace. He didn't answer. He reached the last few steps. His SUV waited at the curb. That was when it happened. A figure moved through the crowd, slipping between people like a shadow. Not fast, not loud, just determined. Jonathan's security noticed late. One man shifted, stepping toward the person. "Ma'am, you need to—" But the woman raised a hand, not as a threat, but like a plea. Then she reached Jonathan, her fingers wrapped around his sleeve. They were thin fingers, rough, dry, the kind of hands that had known cold nights and hard sidewalks. Jonathan froze. His security surged forward, ready to pull her away. But the woman spoke before anyone could move. "Don't look," she said, her voice shaking. "Please, don't look." Her words were soft, but something about them cut through the noise. They didn't sound like a scam or a cry for money. They sounded like fear. Real fear. Jonathan looked down at her. She was black, maybe early 30s. Her clothes were worn and layered like she had dressed for cold, even though the day wasn't that cold. A faded hoodie hung under a thin coat. Her shoes were too big, the soles bent and tired. But her eyes were steady and sad and familiar in a way that made Jonathan's stomach drop. His security guard tried again, firmer this time. "Ma'am, step back." The woman didn't step back. Her grip tightened. Not hard, just desperate. "Don't look," she repeated. "If you look, it'll happen all over again." Jonathan's breath caught. His lawyer leaned close. "Jonathan, let's go." Jonathan didn't move. Something in him rose up like an old wound tearing open. He had heard those words before, not the exact words, but that same kind of plea, that same kind of panic wrapped in control. His gaze lifted, slowly. The woman's face came into full view, and then the world tilted. He saw her clearly now, the curve of her cheek, the shape of her mouth, the scar near her eyebrow, the way her eyes didn't blink, like she was bracing for impact. Jonathan's heart slammed against his ribs. No, it couldn't be. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. 10 years. 10 years of trying to forget. 10 years of telling himself that case was behind him. 10 years of waking up some nights with the memory of a courtroom, a trembling voice, and a man in chains. The woman's lips parted. She looked like she wanted to apologize and vanish at the same time, and then Jonathan felt it. Tears. They came fast, like a broken dam. His throat tightened. His eyes burned. His chest hurt, not like a heart attack, but like grief suddenly remembered. He didn't care who saw him. He didn't care about cameras. He didn't care about his suit or his pride. He just stood there on the courthouse steps, a billionaire in a perfect tie, crying like a child. His security team looked stunned. One of them leaned in, voice low. "Sir, are you okay?" Jonathan couldn't answer. The woman's eyes filled too. She didn't cry loudly. Her tears slid down her cheeks in silence. "I told you not to," she whispered. Jonathan's hands shook. He forced himself to speak, voice breaking. "It's you." The woman swallowed. "Yes." His lawyer looked confused. "Jonathan, do you know her?" Jonathan stared at the woman like she was a ghost. "I do," he said, barely above a whisper. The crowd pressed closer. People sensed drama. Phones rose like a wall of glass. Jonathan's head of security lifted a hand. "Back up. Give him space." But people didn't listen much. Not when a famous man cried in public. The woman's grip loosened. She looked around, panicked now. "You can't—" she started. "Not here. Please, not here." Jonathan wiped at his face, embarrassed only for a second, then ashamed of that embarrassment. He took a shaky breath. His voice came out rough. "Why are you here?" he asked. "After all this time?" Her eyes flicked toward the courthouse doors like she feared someone inside might be watching. "I had to," she said. "I didn't want to. I tried not to, but I saw you come out. And I knew God was giving me one last chance." Jonathan's chest tightened again at the word God. He had donated millions to churches and shelters. He had funded food programs. He had spoken about hope. But deep down, he still carried the feeling that he didn't deserve hope. The woman took a step closer, voice dropping. "They're still here," she said, "and they still don't know the truth. And if you look the wrong way, if you say the wrong thing—" Her voice cracked. It could happen again. Jonathan stared at her, confused. "What are you talking about?" She shook her head fast. "Not here." A siren wailed in the distance. Traffic honked. Reporters shouted questions. Jonathan's security guard leaned in, urgent. "Sir, we need to move. This is turning into a scene." Jonathan looked at his SUV, looked back at the woman. She looked exhausted, not just tired, but worn down in a way no sleep could fix. Like life had been grinding her down for years, and yet she had stood in front of him anyway, like she had once before. Jonathan swallowed hard. "Come with me," he said. Her eyes widened. "No, I can't." "Yes," he insisted, voice firm now. "We're not doing this here. You said, not here. Fine, but you're coming with me." His lawyer started to protest, but Jonathan raised a hand. "Please," Jonathan said softer. "Just talk to me. Tell me why you did what you did." The woman's face tightened. Pain flickered across it like lightning. For a moment, Jonathan thought she would run, that she would melt back into the crowd and disappear the way she had 10 years ago. But then she nodded once, slowly, like she was stepping off a cliff. Jonathan turned to his security. "Clear the way." They moved fast, forming a barrier. Jonathan guided the woman toward the SUV, not grabbing her, not dragging her, just walking close enough that she wouldn't be swallowed by the crowd. Cameras flashed. Someone shouted, "Who is she?" The woman flinched at the sound. Jonathan opened the back door and waited. She hesitated. Jonathan looked at her again, really looked. He saw fear, shame, a kind of tired that went bone deep. And he saw something else, too, stubborn light, a kind of faith that refused to die. "Please," Jonathan said again, voice low so only she could hear. "I won't let them hurt you." The woman swallowed hard. Then she stepped into the SUV. Jonathan followed, the door closing behind them with a heavy thud that blocked out the noise of the world. Inside, the car smelled like leather and clean air. The woman sat stiff, hands in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor like she didn't trust herself to look up. Jonathan sat across from her, still wiping his face, still trying to breathe through the ache in his chest. The SUV pulled away from the courthouse. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The city blurred past the tinted windows. Finally, Jonathan's voice came out quiet, broken. "You ruined a man's life," he said, "and I've never been able to forget it." The woman closed her eyes. "I know," she whispered. Jonathan's throat tightened again. "And yet, you saved mine," he said, almost like a question. The woman opened her eyes. They shined with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "Yes," she said. "That's why I said don't look, because once you remember me, you start remembering everything." Jonathan stared at her, heart pounding. The SUV turned onto a calmer street. The noise of downtown faded. Jonathan leaned forward slightly. "What's your name?" he asked. The woman's voice came out small. "Eleanor," she said, Jonathan repeated it like it mattered. "Eleanor." Eleanor nodded once, still staring down. And then, in a voice so soft it sounded like a prayer, she said the words that changed the air in the car completely. "The man who went to prison," she whispered. "He wasn't just some stranger." Jonathan's breath caught. Eleanor lifted her eyes to his. "He was my brother," she said. "And his name was William." Jonathan felt the floor drop out from under him. The car kept moving. The city kept breathing. The world kept going. But inside that SUV, time seemed to stop. Jonathan's hands curled into fists, not in anger, but in shock. Eleanor's voice trembled as she spoke again. "And he's still in there," she whispered, "because of me." Jonathan's eyes filled with tears all over again. And this time, he didn't bother to hide them, because now he understood the true meaning of her words. Don't look. Don't remember. Don't open the door to a past that could destroy everything. But it was too late. He had looked, and the truth had found him. The SUV turned onto a quiet road, heading toward a place where there would be no reporters, no cameras, and no easy way out. Jonathan's voice came out rough and full of promise. "Then we're going to get him out," he said. "I swear to you." Eleanor stared at him like she wanted to believe him, but she had been disappointed too many times. Outside, the sky stayed bright, but inside, something much brighter sparked to life. Hope. And it scared her more than anything, because hope meant risk, and risk meant pain. Still, she didn't pull away. She just whispered, almost too soft to hear, "Okay." And as the SUV disappeared into the city, the first small step toward redemption began. The SUV moved through the city like a quiet bubble. The world outside the tinted windows looked loud and busy, but inside the car, everything felt slowed down. Jonathan sat with his hands clasped tight, as if he could hold himself together by force. Eleanor sat across from him, shoulders hunched, eyes lowered, like she expected the seat to vanish and drop her onto the pavement. No one spoke for a full minute. Jonathan's security driver kept both hands on the wheel. The head of security sat in the front passenger seat, watching the side mirrors. The men in front didn't turn around. They didn't ask questions. They had learned not to. Jonathan cleared his throat. His voice sounded rough, like he had swallowed sand. "Where do you want to talk?" he asked. Eleanor's lips pressed together. She glanced at the front seats, then back down. "Not somewhere fancy," she said. "Not somewhere with people staring." Jonathan nodded. "Okay." Eleanor hesitated. "Somewhere. Quiet. A park, or a bench. Anywhere I can breathe." Jonathan looked out at the passing buildings. Then he leaned forward slightly and spoke to his head of security. "Find a quiet place," he said. "No cameras, no crowds." "Yes, sir," the guard replied. The SUV turned off the main street and moved into calmer roads. Trees began to appear, bare branches stretching into the sky like thin fingers. A small neighborhood park came into view, with a walking path and a few benches spaced far apart. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't crowded. Just a patch of green trying to survive between concrete and traffic. The SUV pulled into a small lot. Jonathan looked at Eleanor. "Will this work?" Eleanor stared out the window at the park, as if she didn't trust it. Then she nodded once. Jonathan stepped out first. The cold air hit his face and woke him up a little. He walked around and opened Eleanor's door, not because he thought she needed help, but because he didn't want her to feel like a problem being managed. Eleanor stepped out slowly. Her shoes scraped the pavement. She pulled her coat closer around her body, even though the sun was out. Jonathan's security team moved into position nearby, giving distance but staying close enough to react. Jonathan pointed to a bench under a big oak tree. Its branches were wide and bare, but it still looked strong. He walked there, and Eleanor followed. When they sat, there was space between them at first. Eleanor kept her hands in her lap, fingers twisting. Jonathan rested his elbows on his knees and looked at the ground like it held answers. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. A couple walked by on the path, holding hands. A child laughed near the swings. Life went on like nothing had happened. Jonathan swallowed hard. "Eleanor," he said, saying her name carefully. "I need you to understand something. I've thought about that day for years." Eleanor's eyes stayed on her hands. "I tried not to," Jonathan continued, "but it stayed with me. I never forgot the man's face, the way he looked when the verdict came down, like his whole world snapped." Eleanor flinched at that. Her fingers stopped moving. Jonathan's voice lowered. "William." Eleanor's shoulders rose with a shaky breath. She nodded once, not looking up. Jonathan let the silence sit for a moment. He didn't rush her. He could feel that she had carried this story like a heavy box for too long. If he pushed, it might break her. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "That day," she said, "I wasn't supposed to be there." Jonathan turned slightly toward her. "Then why were you?" Eleanor's eyes lifted to the tree, not to him. "I went because William asked me to," she said. "He had gotten that job at the warehouse, remember? The one near the courthouse? He started early. He said he'd walk me to the bus stop so I wouldn't go alone." Jonathan listened closely. He didn't interrupt. Eleanor's voice was quiet, but steady. "We were poor. Not the kind of poor people talk about on TV, the kind where you count pennies at the store and pretend you're not hungry so your little sister can eat. William was the one who kept us standing." Jonathan's throat tightened. "You had a sister?" Eleanor nodded. "She's grown now, married, doesn't know where I am." Jonathan's eyes softened. "I'm sorry." Eleanor's mouth twitched, but there was no smile in it. "That day, William walked me to the bus stop like he always did. We passed the courthouse. It was busy. People were everywhere." She finally glanced at Jonathan, just for a second. There were men outside. Not reporters. Not regular people. They were watching. Jonathan's body went still. Eleanor looked back down. "William noticed them too. He told me to keep walking, but I didn't." Jonathan breathed out slowly. "What did you do?" Eleanor swallowed. "I stepped into the courthouse lobby. I told myself I was just getting warm before the bus came. But I think I already felt it. Something was wrong." A gust of wind moved through the park. Leaves scraped across the path like paper. Eleanor continued. "I saw you there. Not like now, with security and cameras. Back then you were still just a man. A rich one, sure, but not famous." Jonathan nodded faintly. He remembered that younger version of himself. Sharp, proud, always moving fast. Eleanor's voice grew tighter. "I saw you talk to someone in a suit, then you walked towards the courtroom hall." Jonathan's eyes narrowed, trying to match her words to his memory. He remembered being in a rush. He remembered a meeting. He remembered feeling watched, but brushing it off. Eleanor took a shaky breath. "I went to the restroom, and when I came out, I heard two men talking in a stairwell." Jonathan's pulse quickened. "What did they say?" Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. "They said they were tired of you. That you were getting in the way. That today would be the day you learned you weren't untouchable." Jonathan's stomach turned. Eleanor's eyes filled, but she blinked hard. "They said you would come out of the courtroom hall alone at lunch. They said there would be a clean shot near the side exit." Jonathan stared at her, his mouth slightly open. Eleanor shook her head slowly, like she still couldn't believe it herself. "I didn't know what to do. I was just a woman in a hoodie. Nobody would listen to me." Jonathan's voice came out strained. You could have told the police. Eleanor let out a small, bitter laugh. It wasn't mean. It was tired. You think I didn't think of that? She asked softly. A black woman with no money, walking up to police officers and saying she overheard two men planning to kill a rich businessman. They would have asked my name, my address, my job. They would have looked at me like I was a problem. Jonathan's face tightened. He didn't argue. He couldn't. Eleanor lowered her voice. And if those men heard, I told, they would have come for William, for my sister, for me. Jonathan's hands squeezed together. So what did you do? Eleanor's breath shook. I ran outside. I found William at the bus stop. I told him we needed to go. I didn't tell him why at first, but he could see I was scared, so he followed. Jonathan leaned forward. And then? Eleanor's eyes finally met his, and the pain in them was so clear it made Jonathan's chest ache. Then those same men came out, she said. Not all of them, just two. They looked around like they owned the air. One of them stared right at us. Jonathan felt. Cold spread through him. Eleanor continued. William stepped in front of me. He didn't even know what he was blocking. He just did what he always did. Jonathan's voice was barely a whisper. Protect you. Eleanor nodded. Yes. She looked away, blinking fast. One of the men walked closer, she said. He asked William if he had a problem. William said no. He tried to keep his voice calm. He said we were leaving. Jonathan swallowed. Eleanor's jaw trembled. But the man didn't like being talked to like that. He shoved William. William shoved back. It happened so fast. People yelled. Someone screamed. Jonathan's eyes closed briefly. He remembered a blur. He remembered hearing about a fight outside. He remembered being rushed away. Eleanor pressed her palms into her thighs, grounding herself. The police came. They grabbed William. They grabbed that man, too. But the man, he had friends. He had power. He knew people. Jonathan's eyes opened, and William didn't. Eleanor shook her head. No. Jonathan exhaled slowly, his mind racing. But that still doesn't explain the court testimony. Eleanor's shoulders sank. I know. She looked at him again, and her voice softened. The men in the stairwell, they weren't just angry. They were organized, like they had planned everything. Jonathan stared at her. You think the fight was a setup? Eleanor nodded. I think they wanted a reason to pull you to the side exit. I think they wanted the police busy. I think they wanted chaos. Jonathan's stomach dropped. So what stopped them? Eleanor's voice cracked. William. Jonathan stared at her. Eleanor swallowed hard. When the police grabbed him, William yelled. He kept yelling. He said the man started it. He said there were witnesses. He said to check the cameras. Jonathan's throat tightened. Eleanor continued. The officers got annoyed. They told him to shut up, but he kept going. He wouldn't stop. He wouldn't let it go. Jonathan could see it now, clear as day. A decent man refusing to be silent, even when it cost him. Eleanor's eyes filled again. And while all of that happened, you didn't go out the side exit. You got held inside. The whole building went on alert for a while because of the scuffle. Your schedule changed. You left through the front later, surrounded by people. Jonathan's lips parted. So I didn't die. Because William made noise. Eleanor's voice became a whisper. Yes. Jonathan's eyes burned. He rubbed his face hard, like he could wipe away the past. Then his voice dropped. But the trial, the lie, why did you do that part? Eleanor's whole body stiffened. She stared at the grass under the bench. Her voice came out thin. Because they came for me, she said. Jonathan's head snapped towards her. Who? Eleanor swallowed. The men, or people like them. After that day, someone found me. Jonathan's chest tightened again. When? Eleanor's fingers twisted. That night, a car followed me. It parked near our building. A man knocked on our door. Jonathan leaned forward, heart pounding. What did he say? Eleanor's lips trembled. He said if I told the truth, my sister would disappear. He said William would rot in prison either way. He said the only choice I had was whether more people got hurt. Jonathan's jaw clenched. His hands curled into fists. Eleanor's voice broke, but she kept going. Then he said something else. He said, "You were the target. Not William. Not me. You." Jonathan stared at her, stunned. Eleanor looked up, eyes shining with tears. And he said if I cared about anyone innocent at all, I would keep my mouth shut and do what I was told. Jonathan's voice came out low and sharp. They forced you. Eleanor shook her head slowly. Not exactly. They didn't put a gun to my head in the courtroom. They didn't drag me to the stand. They just made sure I knew the cost. She pressed a hand to her chest, breathing through the memory. I was scared, okay? I was so scared. Jonathan's eyes softened. I know. Eleanor shook her head harder, tears finally falling. No, you don't. Because after I lied, after the judge banged the gavel, after William was taken away, I didn't just lose him. I lost myself. Jonathan's throat tightened. He didn't speak. He let her words land. Eleanor wiped her cheeks with the sleeve of her coat. I told myself it was for a reason. I told myself I saved you. I told myself maybe God would use it somehow. Jonathan whispered. And did he? Eleanor let out a shaky breath. I don't know. Some nights I believed he did. Some nights I thought I was just making excuses. Jonathan stared at her, his eyes wet again. The park around them stayed normal. People walked. Cars passed. A bird hopped across the grass like it had no worries in the world. But for Jonathan, the world had split open. He had always thought of that case as one tragic mistake, a bad moment in a broken system. Now he saw it for what it truly was, a sacrifice, a choice. A storm Eleanor stood in alone. Jonathan's voice shook. Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you tell me back then? Eleanor looked at him like the answer was obvious. You were rich, she said softly. You had power, you had people, and still someone tried to kill you. What chance did I have? Jonathan swallowed. He didn't have a good answer. Eleanor looked away. I tried to forget you. I tried to bury it, but I saw your face on TV. I saw you talking about justice, about reform, about doing what's right. Her voice tightened. And every time, I thought of William, sitting in a cell, waiting for the world to notice him. Jonathan's chest ached. Eleanor's eyes flicked toward his security men standing at a distance. Then I saw you, today, and I knew if I didn't speak now, I never would. Jonathan nodded slowly. You said it could happen again. What did you mean? Eleanor stared out at the street, eyes narrowed like she was listening for danger. I saw them, she whispered. Jonathan stiffened. Saw who? Eleanor's voice dropped. A man from back then. Older now, but the same eyes. He was across the street when you walked out. Jonathan's stomach twisted. Are you sure? Eleanor nodded. I'm sure. That's why I grabbed you. That's why I said don't look. Jonathan's heart pounded. Eleanor's breathing quickened. If he knew I was talking to you, if he knew the truth was coming back, I don't know what he'd do. Jonathan stared at her, fear and anger mixing in his chest. He looked toward his head of security and signaled him over. The guard walked up quickly. Sir. Jonathan kept his voice calm, but firm. We need to be careful. Eleanor thinks someone from 10 years ago is watching. The guard's eyes sharpened. Understood. Jonathan turned back to Eleanor. His voice softened. "You're not alone now," he said. "Not anymore." Eleanor stared at him. Her eyes were full of doubt, like she had heard promises before. Jonathan leaned in just a little. "Listen to me. I don't know how to make up for what happened. I don't know if I can. But I can do one thing right now." He swallowed. "I can try to bring William home." Eleanor's lips parted. She looked like she wanted to cry and laugh at the same time. "You can't," she whispered. Jonathan's gaze stayed steady. "I can try." Eleanor shook her head slowly, not in refusal, but in fear. "They're powerful," she said. "So am I," Jonathan replied, and then his voice broke. "But that's not the point. The point is, I owe him, and I owe you." Eleanor's eyes fell again. "I don't want your money." "I know," Jonathan said softly. "That's why I believe you." Eleanor's breath trembled. She looked up at the sky, blinking against tears. For the first time, Jonathan saw something shift in her face. Not relief, not joy, something smaller, like a door cracking open. Hope. And hope, Jonathan realized, could be terrifying, because hope meant you could lose something again. He stood slowly and offered his hand, not like a savior, but like a person asking for trust. "Come on," he said. "Let's go somewhere safe, somewhere warm. We'll talk to my lawyer, not to scare you, not to trap you, just to start." Eleanor stared at his hand. Her fingers hovered, trembling. Then she placed her hand in his. It was light, cold, but real. As they walked back toward the SUV, the wind picked up again. The oak branches swayed above them. Jonathan didn't know what was coming. He didn't know how deep this went. But one thing was clear now. The story wasn't about a lie anymore. It was about what that lie had cost, and whether the truth could still save them all. The SUV door opened. Eleanor stepped in first this time, a little steadier than before. Jonathan followed, and as the car pulled away from the park, Eleanor whispered something that sounded more like a prayer than a sentence. "Please," she said, "don't let him die in there." Jonathan's eyes stung. He nodded once, voice low. "I won't." The SUV drove through quieter streets as afternoon faded toward evening. The sun dipped lower, turning the windows gold for a few moments before slipping behind buildings. Inside the car, the mood had changed. It was no longer frantic. It was heavy, like the air before a storm. Jonathan sat back, one hand resting against his knee, the other pressed lightly to his mouth as he thought. Eleanor sat across from him, shoulders drawn in, eyes fixed on the floor. She looked like someone who had said too much and still hadn't said enough. Jonathan broke the silence gently. "I need to understand everything," he said. "Not to judge you, not to rush you, just to understand." Eleanor nodded. "Okay." Her voice sounded tired now, like she had been holding herself upright on will alone. The SUV slowed and turned into a small, clean hotel near the edge of the city. Nothing flashy, just brick walls, warm lights, and a quiet lobby. Jonathan had chosen it on purpose. The car stopped. The driver opened the door. Jonathan stepped out first, scanning the area out of habit now. The street was calm. No cameras, no reporters, just a soft hum of traffic in the distance. Eleanor followed him inside. The lobby smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. A fireplace crackled near the wall, throwing off heat and a gentle orange glow. A couple sat nearby, talking softly. A man read a newspaper. Jonathan spoke quietly to the front desk. A key was handed over. No names were said out loud. They rode the elevator up in silence. Eleanor leaned against the wall, eyes closed, as if the steady movement helped ground her. When they reached the room, Jonathan opened the door and stepped aside, letting Eleanor enter first. The room was simple. 2 chairs by the window, a small table. neutral walls, a bed made tight and clean. It felt safe, temporary, like a place meant for rest, not hiding. Jonathan gestured to the chair near the window. "Sit," he said, "please." Eleanor sat slowly, hand still folded in her lap. Jonathan took the other chair. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, posture open. Outside, the sky deepened into pink and purple. Jonathan took a breath. "Tell me about William," he said. Eleanor's lips curved slightly at the sound of his brother's name. Not a smile, more like a memory stretching. "He was older," she said. 5 years. He used to say that meant he was half a parent and half a bodyguard." Jonathan listened. "He worked 2 jobs. Eleanor continued. "Sometimes 3. He never complained. He used to come home tired, but he'd still ask if I ate, still ask about my day." Her voice softened. "When our mother died, he didn't fall apart. He just stepped in." Jonathan nodded slowly. Eleanor glanced at him. "You ever notice how some people are born old?" she asked. "Like they don't get a chance to be careless." Jonathan thought for a moment. "Yes," he said. "I think I know exactly what you mean." Eleanor nodded. "That was William." She swallowed. "He believed in rules, in doing things the right way. He believed if you worked hard and stayed honest, life would meet you halfway." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "And the system failed him." Eleanor looked down. "Yes." She paused, gathering herself. "After the arrest, I visited him every chance I could. He kept telling me not to worry. He said the truth would come out. He said, God wouldn't let this stand." Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. Eleanor's voice shook. "I wanted to scream every time he said that." Jonathan looked at her. "Why?" "Because I knew," she whispered. "I knew the truth wasn't coming. Not unless I brought it. And I couldn't." Jonathan leaned forward slightly. "Did William ever suspect?" Eleanor shook her head fast. "No, never. He trusted me. That's the worst part." She pressed a hand to her chest. "He trusted me more than anyone." The room fell quiet. The only sound was the hum of the heater and the faint noise of traffic outside. Jonathan finally spoke. "What happened at the trial?" Eleanor closed her eyes. "They coached me," she said. "Not like in movies. No shouting, no threats in the room. Just guidance." Jonathan's brow furrowed. "They told me what to say." Eleanor continued. "They reminded me of my sister, of William, of how accidents happen." Her voice trembled. "They made it sound like I was protecting everyone." Jonathan's fists clenched. "And when you took the stand?" Eleanor opened her eyes, staring straight ahead. "I felt sick. My hands were shaking so bad I thought I'd faint." Jonathan could see it clearly now. Eleanor swallowed. "I told the lie, just like they asked. I said William started the fight. I said he was angry. I said he threw the first punch." Her voice cracked. Every word felt like breaking something inside me. Jonathan's voice came out low. "And William?" Eleanor shook her head. "He turned and looked at me. Just once." Jonathan inhaled sharply. "He didn't look angry." Eleanor said. "He looked confused, hurt, like he thought I was mistaken." Tears slid down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. "I wanted to scream that I was lying," she whispered. "I wanted to run to him, but I just sat there, and I nodded." Jonathan felt something tear inside his chest. Eleanor continued, voice barely holding together. "When the verdict came down, he didn't cry. He just stood there, hands in cuffs, and nodded back at me, like he was telling me it was okay." Jonathan's eyes burned. "He told me later," Eleanor said, "that he wasn't mad, that he knew I must have been scared." Jonathan shook his head slowly. He protected you even then. Yes, Eleanor said. Always. She wiped her cheeks now, rough and quick. After that, everything fell apart. I couldn't keep my job. People looked at me different. Some knew I lied, others didn't, but they felt something was wrong. Jonathan asked quietly, What happened to your sister? Eleanor sighed. A church family took her in, helped her finish school. I stepped away. I didn't want my mess touching her. Jonathan nodded, understanding the weight of that choice. Eleanor looked at him again. I tried to live normal. I really did. But every night I saw his face. Every night I heard that gavel. Jonathan's voice was thick. And I went on living my life, building companies, giving speeches, pretending the world made sense. Eleanor's eyes met his. You didn't know? Jonathan shook his head. No, but ignorance doesn't erase responsibility. He sat back, rubbing his hands together like he was trying to warm them. I want you to know something, Jonathan said. After that year, I stopped going anywhere alone. I never knew why. I just felt like something had brushed past me. Eleanor whispered, Death. Jonathan nodded. I always thought I was lucky. He said, Now I know I was saved. Eleanor looked away, overwhelmed. Jonathan leaned forward again. Do you have anything? He asked gently. Anything that could help us prove this? Eleanor hesitated. I don't have recordings. I don't have papers. Jonathan nodded. That's okay. But, Eleanor added softly, I remember faces, names, places. I remember the stairwell, the time, the words. Jonathan's eyes sharpened. That's more than you think. Eleanor sighed. They're powerful. So am I, Jonathan said again, quieter this time. But more importantly, I'm stubborn. Eleanor let out a small, surprised laugh. It escaped before she could stop it. Jonathan smiled faintly. There it is. Eleanor shook her head. I'm scared. Jonathan nodded. I know. She looked at him fully now. What if we fail? Jonathan didn't answer right away. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. Then we failed trying, he said, and William won't be alone anymore. Eleanor's chest rose and fell. You'd risk everything? Jonathan turned back to her. I already did, he said. 10 years ago. I just didn't know it yet. A knock came at the door. Jonathan tensed. He glanced at Eleanor. Her eyes widened. He moved calmly, checking the peephole. It was his head of security. Jonathan opened the door slightly. Yes. We swept the area, the guard said quietly. No sign of anyone. Suspicious. We'll have someone outside all night. Jonathan nodded. Thank you. He closed the door. Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Jonathan returned to his chair. You're safe tonight, he said. Tomorrow we start. Eleanor stared at him. Start what? Jonathan's voice was steady now, clear. We start by telling the truth, he said, slowly, carefully, the right way. Eleanor looked down at her hands again. They were shaking less now. What if William doesn't forgive me? She whispered. Jonathan's eyes softened. From what you've told me, I think he already has. Eleanor closed her eyes, a tear slipping free. Outside, the sky turned deep blue. The city lights blinked on one by one. Jonathan stood and moved towards the door. I'll have food sent up, he said, and clean clothes. You don't owe me anything. This is just human. Eleanor nodded, too moved to speak. Jonathan paused at the door. Eleanor? She looked up. For what it's worth, he said, voice low and sincere. You did something braver than most people ever will. Eleanor swallowed. I don't feel brave. Jonathan met her gaze. That's usually how it works. He stepped out, closing the door softly behind him. Eleanor sat alone in the quiet room, the warmth of the heater wrapping around her. For the first time in years, she wasn't watching the door in fear. She pressed a hand to her chest and whispered a prayer she hadn't dared to pray before. "Please," she said, "let this mean something." Outside the room, Jonathan leaned against the hallway wall for a moment, eyes closed. He breathed in, breathed out. 10 years ago, a lie had saved his life. Now the truth was knocking, and neither of them could turn away anymore. The night settled slowly around the hotel, wrapping the building in quiet. Streetlights hummed outside, casting long shadows across the pavement. Inside Eleanor's room, the lights were soft, warm, and steady. They didn't flicker. They didn't threaten to go out. That alone made Eleanor's shoulders loosen a little. A knock came at the door. Eleanor flinched at first, then reminded herself where she was. She stood, smoothed her coat, and opened the door a crack. A hotel worker stood there with a tray of food and a small paper bag. "Room service," he said kindly. Eleanor stepped aside. "Thank you." The smell of warm soup and bread filled the room. It made her stomach tighten with hunger she had ignored all day. The worker set the tray on the small table and left without asking questions. Eleanor closed the door and locked it, then leaned her forehead against it for a second. She was safe, at least for tonight. She moved to the table and sat down. The soup was simple: chicken, vegetables, salt. Nothing fancy. She lifted the spoon and paused, staring into the bowl like it might disappear. Then she took a bite. The warmth spread through her chest, and before she knew it, tears dropped into the soup. She wiped her face with her sleeve and kept eating anyway. Across the hall, Jonathan stood in his own room, staring at the wall like it held answers. His jacket lay tossed over a chair. His tie was loose. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms marked by faint scars from years of restless work and stress. He picked up his phone and stared at it. He could call his lawyer. He could call his board. He could call his public relations team and start building a wall around this situation. Instead, he called his private investigator. "I need everything," Jonathan said when the line connected. "An old case, about 10 years ago. Assault outside a courthouse. Wrongful conviction. Name's William." He paused, listening. "Yes," Jonathan added, quietly. "No alerts, no flags." He hung up and rubbed his face. For years, he had believed that money could fix almost anything. Now he wasn't so sure. A soft knock came at his door. Jonathan opened it to find Eleanor standing there, holding the tray with both hands like it was an offering. I brought you some," she said. "I wasn't sure if you'd eaten." Jonathan's chest tightened. Even now, she was thinking of others first. "Thank you," he said gently. "You didn't have to." Eleanor shrugged. "I wanted to." He stepped aside and let her in. Jonathan's room looked much like hers, clean, simple, quiet. He set the tray down and gestured to the chair. They sat across from each other again, the same way they had in the park and the car. But now, the walls held their words. No crowds, no danger, just truth. Jonathan spoke first. "I keep thinking about the moment I walked out that day," he said. "I remember feeling annoyed, impatient, like the world owed me speed." Eleanor listened. "I didn't know how close I came." Jonathan continued. "I never thought to ask why my schedule changed. I just accepted it." Eleanor lowered her eyes. "I watched you leave," she said softly. "I remember thinking, at least one life will go on." Jonathan closed his eyes. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Jonathan asked the question he had been carrying since the SUV. "What happened to you after the trial?" he asked. "After everything fell apart?" Eleanor took a slow breath. "At first I stayed," she said. "I thought maybe William would need me. But every visit broke me. Every goodbye felt like a small death." Jonathan listened closely. "I couldn't keep my apartment," Eleanor continued. "My job let me go. They said it was downsizing, but I knew better." She smiled faintly, without humor. "People don't like liars, even when they don't know what kind of liar you are." Jonathan nodded, his jaw tight. "I bounced around for a while," Eleanor said. "Couches, shelters, churches. I prayed a lot." Her voice softened. "I asked God if he saw me, if he remembered what I did." Jonathan leaned forward. "And what did you feel?" Eleanor thought for a moment. "Some nights I felt nothing, just emptiness. Other nights, I felt like he was sitting with me in the dark." Jonathan swallowed hard. Eleanor looked up at him. "That's why I didn't end it," she said simply. "I felt like my life still belonged to something bigger than my pain." Jonathan looked away, his eyes wet. He had spoken to crowds about faith and values. He had donated to causes, but he had never known faith like this. Quiet, costly, lonely. Eleanor straightened slightly. "I want you to understand something," she said. "I never wanted praise. I never wanted to be thanked." Jonathan shook his head. "You deserve both." Eleanor smiled sadly. "That's not why I did it." Jonathan met her gaze. "Then why?" Eleanor's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Because if I could save one life, maybe God would forgive me for the one I broke." The words hung in the air like a fragile thing. Jonathan stood up suddenly and walked to the window. He pressed his hand to the glass, breathing slowly. "I don't know if I believe forgiveness works that way," he said. "But I know this. What you did was not small." He turned back to her. "It was enormous." Eleanor shook her head. "It destroyed my family." Jonathan stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "It also saved mine." Eleanor's breath caught. Jonathan spoke again, quieter now. "Tomorrow I want to visit a lawyer I trust, one who's not afraid of old ghosts." Eleanor stiffened. "That's dangerous." "Yes," Jonathan said, "but necessary." She hesitated. "What if they come for you again?" Jonathan met her eyes. "Then they'll find me ready this time." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. She searched his face like she was trying to see if he meant it. Finally, she nodded. They finished the food in silence. When Eleanor stood to leave, she paused at the door. "Thank you," she said, "for listening." Jonathan shook his head. "Thank you for coming back." Eleanor stepped out into the hallway. Jonathan watched her go, his heart heavy but steady. That night, Eleanor lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The room was quiet, safe. She whispered another prayer, this one softer than the last. "Please," she said, "if this is the start, help me be brave." In the next room, Jonathan sat awake at his desk, writing notes by hand like he used to before the world got loud. Names, places, dates, promises. Outside, the city slept. Inside 2 small hotel rooms, the past finally spoke. And neither of them turned away. Morning came softly, like it did not want to scare anyone. Pale light slipped through the hotel curtains and rested on the floor. The city outside was already awake, but inside Eleanor's room, everything felt still. Eleanor woke with a start, her heart racing, as if she had been running in her sleep. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she saw the clean walls, the small table, the folded clothes left neatly on the chair. Safe, she told herself, just for now. She sat up and pressed her feet to the carpet. It felt thick and warm under her toes. She closed her eyes and took a slow breath. "Thank you," she whispered, not sure who she was thanking more, God or the quiet. She washed her face in the sink, studying her reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed older than she felt. Lines of worry framed her eyes. But there was something else there, too. A spark. She dressed slowly in the clean clothes Jonathan had sent up during the night. They were simple, soft, nothing flashy. She ran her fingers over the fabric, almost afraid it would vanish. A knock came at the door. Eleanor's shoulders tensed, then relaxed when she recognized Jonathan's voice. "It's me." She opened the door. Jonathan stood there holding 2 cups of coffee and a small paper bag. "I hope this is okay," he said. "I didn't know what you liked." Eleanor smiled faintly. "It's perfect." They walked down to the lobby together, choosing a quiet corner near the window. The fireplace from the night before still burned low, giving off gentle heat. Morning light spilled across the floor. Jonathan sat across from Eleanor, setting the coffee down carefully. "I didn't sleep much," he admitted. Eleanor nodded. "Me neither." Jonathan took a sip of his coffee and then leaned forward. "I spoke to my investigator early this morning." Eleanor's heart skipped. "Already?" "Yes," Jonathan said. "I told him to treat it like his most important case." Eleanor folded her hands. "Did he find anything?" Jonathan hesitated, then smiled slightly. "Not yet, but he believes the file was unusually thin." Eleanor frowned. "Thin? As in—" Jonathan explained. "Important details were missing. Witness statements, camera footage logs, things that should have been there." Eleanor's breath caught. "So, it wasn't just my word?" Jonathan shook his head. "No, it was never just you." Eleanor pressed a hand to her mouth. Her eyes filled, but this time the tears felt different. Not heavy. Light. Jonathan continued. He also confirmed something else. One of the officers on the scene that day retired early. Quietly. Eleanor's voice shook. "Why?" Jonathan met her eyes. "Because he filed a report that didn't match the final version." Eleanor let out a shaky breath. "So someone changed it?" "Yes," Jonathan said, "and someone powerful enough to make it stick." Eleanor leaned back, overwhelmed. "I always felt it," she whispered. "I just didn't know if it was real." Jonathan's voice was calm, steady. "It was real, and now we have a place to start." Eleanor stared at the table, her hands trembling. "Does this mean William might—" Jonathan nodded slowly. "It means there's a chance." Eleanor closed her eyes. A chance. She had stopped letting herself think in those words a long time ago. Jonathan watched her carefully. "I want to be clear," he said. "This won't be fast, and it won't be easy." Eleanor nodded. "I know." "There will be people who try to stop us," Jonathan added. "Some of them will smile while they do it." Eleanor let out a quiet laugh. "I've met those people." Jonathan smiled gently. "Then you're more prepared than you think." They finished their coffee in silence. Outside, the city moved on. Cars passed, people walked by, life continued. After breakfast, Jonathan led Eleanor back to the SUV. His security team was already alert, scanning the area with sharp eyes. Jonathan spoke quietly to the head of security. "We're going to my office. Private entrance." "Yes, sir." The ride felt different from the day before. Not easier, but steadier. Eleanor sat, straighter now, watching the streets go by. Jonathan glanced at her. "Are you okay?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "I'm scared," she admitted. but I'm also tired of being afraid." Jonathan smiled. That's usually how courage starts. They arrived at Jonathan's office building through a side entrance. It was tall and modern, all glass and clean lines. Inside, the halls were quiet, the kind of quiet that came from respect. Jonathan led Eleanor into a conference room with large windows and a long wooden table. He pulled out a chair for her, then sat beside her instead of across from her. A grey-haired man entered a few minutes later. He wore a plain suit and carried a thin folder. "This is my lawyer," Jonathan said. "The one I trust." The lawyer nodded politely at Eleanor. "I've been briefed." Eleanor swallowed. "I don't have money." The lawyer smiled kindly. "That's not why I'm here." Jonathan placed his hands flat on the table. "Tell him everything," he said gently. "Just like you told me." Eleanor took a deep breath. She spoke for a long time. She talked about the stairwell, the men, the threats, the trial, William's face, her sister, the years that followed. No one interrupted her. When she finished, the room was quiet. The lawyer finally spoke. "What you're describing is coercion, witness tampering, obstruction of justice." Eleanor's heart pounded. "So, what does that mean?" "It means," the lawyer said carefully, "your testimony may be invalid." Jonathan leaned forward. "And William?" The lawyer nodded. "It means we can petition for a review." Eleanor's breath came out in a sob before she could stop it. She covered her face. Jonathan placed a hand on her shoulder. Not firm, just present. The lawyer continued. "We'll need to move carefully. Old cases bring old enemies." Jonathan nodded. "We're ready." The lawyer stood. "I'll begin immediately." After he left, Eleanor stayed seated, her body shaking. Jonathan spoke softly. "We took the first step." Eleanor nodded, tears slipping through her fingers. "I never thought I'd hear those words." Jonathan smiled. "Get used to them." That afternoon, Eleanor sat alone in a quiet room at the office, staring out at the city. She thought of William, of his smile, of the way he used to say everything would be okay. For the first time in years, she believed it might be true. As the sun dipped low, Jonathan joined her. "There's one more thing," he said. Eleanor turned to him. "What?" Jonathan hesitated. "The investigator wants to speak to you tomorrow, just to confirm details." Eleanor nodded. "I'll do it." Jonathan smiled. "Good." He paused. "And Eleanor?" "Yes." "No matter what happens next," he said, "you're not invisible anymore." Eleanor looked out at the glowing city, her reflection faint in the glass. Hope stirred again in her chest, and, this time, she didn't push it away. The next morning arrived with heavy clouds and a cold wind that rattled the windows. Eleanor stood by the glass in her hotel room, watching people hurry along the sidewalk below. Coats pulled tight, heads down, everyone rushing somewhere that mattered to them. She pressed her hand to the glass. Today mattered. A knock came at the door. Eleanor opened it to find Jonathan standing there, already dressed for the day, his coat buttoned, his face serious but calm. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. "As I'll ever be." They rode down in silence and climbed into the SUV. The sky stayed grey as they drove, like it was holding its breath. Jonathan spoke as they moved. "The investigator wants to go through everything again," he said. "Details matter, even small ones." Eleanor nodded. "I'll tell him everything I remember." "I know you will," Jonathan said. They arrived at a smaller office building this time, older than Jonathan's, main headquarters. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and coffee. It felt less polished, more real. A man in his late 40s greeted them. He had kind eyes and a notebook already open in his hands. "Thank you for coming," he said to Eleanor. "Take your time." They sat in a small room with no windows, just a table, 3 chairs, and a soft hum from the lights overhead. Eleanor began at the beginning. She spoke slowly, carefully. She described the stairwell again, the voices, the words, the way her stomach had dropped when she realized what she was hearing. The investigator asked gentle questions. "What time was it? Did you recognize any accents? Do you remember where you were standing?" Eleanor answered each one, sometimes closing her eyes to picture it better. Jonathan sat quietly beside her, letting her lead. After nearly 2 hours, Eleanor's voice grew hoarse. The investigator closed his notebook. "You've done well," he said. "This lines up with more than you know." Eleanor blinked. "It does." "Yes," he said. "We found records of 2 men matching your description, both connected to the business dispute surrounding Jonathan at the time." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "So it wasn't random?" "No," the investigator said. "It was planned." Eleanor let out a slow breath. Some part of her had known that all along. Hearing it confirmed still made her chest ache. As they stood to leave, the investigator added, "There's something else." Jonathan looked up. "What?" "One of the men Eleanor described was seen near the courthouse again yesterday." Eleanor froze. Jonathan's eyes sharpened. "Are you sure?" "Yes," the investigator said. "Older now. Different clothes. Same walk. Same eyes." Eleanor's hands shook. "He saw me." Jonathan turned to her. "Did he approach you?" "No," Eleanor said softly. "But he knew I was there." Jonathan's face hardened, not with fear, but with resolve. "Then we move faster," he said. That afternoon, Jonathan met with his legal team while Eleanor waited in a quiet room nearby. She tried to read, but the words blurred together. Every sound made her flinch. A soft knock came at the door. A middle-aged woman stood there, smiling gently. "I'm from a nearby church," the woman said. "Jonathan asked if you'd like some company." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. They talked about small things: the weather, the city, the woman's grandchildren. It grounded Eleanor in a way she hadn't expected. When Jonathan returned, he looked tired but focused. "We're filing the petition," he said, by the end of the day. Eleanor's heart skipped. "That fast?" "Yes," Jonathan said, "before anyone can shut it down." They sat together as Jonathan signed papers, each stroke of the pen feeling heavy with meaning. That evening the clouds finally broke. Rain poured down, steady and clean. Eleanor stood under the awning outside the building, watching it fall. Jonathan joined her. "Tomorrow," he said, "we request a prison visit." Eleanor's breath caught. "To see William?" Jonathan nodded. "It's time." Eleanor closed her eyes, letting the rain sound wash over her. For the first time in 10 years, the fight had truly begun. The prison sat far outside the city, surrounded by tall fences and flat land that seemed to stretch forever. The sky was pale that morning, washed out and quiet. Eleanor watched the road roll by through the SUV window, her hands folded tight in her lap. She had not slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw William's face the way it had looked the last day she saw him. Calm, confused, trying to be strong for her. Her chest ached with words she had held back for 10 long years. Jonathan sat beside her, silent, giving her space. His presence felt steady, like an anchor. "You don't have to say anything today," he said gently as they turned onto the long road leading to the prison. "You can just listen." Eleanor nodded. "I know, but I need to see him." Jonathan nodded back. That's enough. The SUV slowed and stopped at the gate. Guards checked identification. The gates opened with a low, heavy sound that echoed in Eleanor's bones. Inside, everything felt tight. Grey walls, long halls, sharp corners. The air smelled like metal and cleaning soap. They were led into a visiting room with plastic chairs and small tables bolted to the floor. Other families sat quietly, speaking in low voices. Some cried. Some stared at nothing. Eleanor's hands trembled. Jonathan leaned close. I'm right here. A door buzzed, then another. Eleanor's breath caught as William stepped into the room. He was thinner than she remembered. His hair was cut short and streaked with grey at the temples. But his eyes were the same. Warm, steady. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then William smiled. Ellie, he said softly, using the nickname from childhood. Eleanor broke. She rushed forward, stopping only when the guard cleared his throat. William stood too, lifting his hands in a small wave like he was afraid she might vanish. They sat across from each other, the table between them feeling like a wall. William studied her face. You look tired, he said. Eleanor laughed through tears. You don't? William smiled faintly. I've had practice. Jonathan watched quietly from a short distance, giving them privacy. William leaned forward. I prayed for you, he said. Every day. Eleanor pressed her lips together, nodding. I knew you were alive. William continued. I could feel it. Eleanor's heart twisted. I never stopped thinking about you. William's eyes softened. I know. They talked about small things at first. Her sister, old neighbors, memories of their mother's cooking. Each word felt like stepping on broken glass and soft ground at the same time. William finally glanced toward Jonathan. Who's your friend? Eleanor hesitated, then said, He's the man I told you about. William studied Jonathan, curious but calm. The one who's helping? Yes, Eleanor said. William nodded. Thank you, he said simply. Jonathan stood and offered his hand through the small opening. I should have done this a long time ago, he said. William shook his hand firmly. You're here now. The guard announced time was almost up. Eleanor's chest tightened. She wasn't ready. She would never be ready. William reached across the table and rested his hand over hers. Ellie, he said quietly, whatever you're carrying, you don't have to anymore. Eleanor's eyes filled. She wanted to tell him everything. The words burned in her throat. Not yet, she told herself. Soon. The buzzer sounded again. William stood. I'm proud of you, he said. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. As William was led away, he turned once more and smiled. Eleanor watched until the door closed. Outside, the sky felt brighter than before. Jonathan walked beside her as they returned to the SUV. He still believes in you, Jonathan said. Eleanor wiped her face. That makes this harder. Jonathan shook his head gently. It makes it worth it. As the prison faded behind them, Eleanor stared ahead. Soon she would tell him the truth. And whatever happened after that, she would face it. The drive back from the prison was quiet, but it wasn't empty. Eleanor stared out the window as the flat land slowly gave way to buildings again. Her reflection moved across the glass, her eyes distant, her thoughts loud. William's voice echoed in her mind. I'm proud of you. The words both lifted her and crushed her at the same time. Jonathan broke the silence gently. You did well in there. Eleanor nodded. He looks older. Jonathan sighed. Prison does that. Eleanor turned to him. He still believes everything will be okay. Jonathan glanced at her. And that scares you? Yes, she said honestly. Because hope feels cruel when it's fragile. Jonathan didn't argue. He understood that feeling too well. When they arrived back at the city, Jonathan took Eleanor straight to his office. Not the glass conference room this time, but a smaller space tucked away from the main halls. It felt more like a study than a workplace. Books lined the walls. The light was softer. His investigator was already there, sitting at the table with folders spread out in front of him. "We've made progress," the investigator said as they entered. Eleanor's heart jumped. What kind of progress? The investigator slid a folder forward. Witness statements that were never entered into the record. 2 people who saw the fight clearly. Both said William was defending himself. Eleanor covered her mouth. Jonathan leaned forward. Why were they ignored? The investigator tapped the folder. Because one recanted after being visited at home. The other moved out of state the next week. Eleanor whispered, "They were scared." "Yes," the investigator said, "and with good reason." Jonathan picked up another folder. "What else?" The investigator took a breath. Security camera logs from the courthouse exterior were marked corrupted that day. Jonathan frowned. Marked but not destroyed. The investigator nodded. Exactly, which means there may still be backups. Eleanor's hands trembled. So, the truth exists. It does, the investigator said. Someone just buried it. Jonathan closed the folder slowly. Then we dig. The investigator nodded. We already are. Over the next 2 days, the work intensified. Eleanor stayed close, answering questions, sketching layouts, pointing out places she remembered. She surprised herself with how much detail came back once she stopped running from it. She remembered the crack in the stairwell wall, the smell of dust, the echo in the men's voices. Each memory hurt, but it also felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen from her. Jonathan watched her closely, stepping in when she grew tired, offering water, rest, quiet. One evening, Eleanor sat alone in a small chapel Jonathan kept in one of his buildings. It wasn't grand, just a few rows of chairs and a simple cross on the wall. She knelt, hands clasped. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know how to tell him. Her voice cracked. Please, help me tell the truth without breaking him. She stayed there a long time, breathing, listening, letting the quiet settle inside her. The next morning brought good news. Jonathan found Eleanor in the office kitchen, staring into a cup of tea she hadn't touched. They found it, he said. Her head snapped up. Found what? The footage? Jonathan said, a smile breaking through, his careful calm. Not the fight itself, but the moments before. Eleanor stood slowly. What does it show? Jonathan's voice softened. It shows William stepping between you and the man, clear as day. Eleanor's knees weakened. She grabbed the counter. Jonathan moved closer. It shows intent, protection, not aggression. Eleanor laughed and cried at the same time. That's who he is. Jonathan nodded. I know. Later that afternoon, the lawyer returned, his expression cautious but hopeful. This changes things, he said. We can request a parole hearing, quickly. Eleanor's breath caught. How quickly? A week, the lawyer said, if no one interferes. Jonathan's jaw tightened. They will. Yes, the lawyer agreed. But now we're prepared. That night, Eleanor sat alone in her room again. The hotel no longer felt foreign. It felt like a place between two lives. She picked up her phone, staring at William's number. She couldn't call. Not yet. Instead, she wrote him a letter. Dear William, there are things I need to tell you. Things I was too afraid to say before. I promise I will tell you soon. I promise I won't hide anymore. She folded the paper carefully. The next morning, the parole hearing was officially scheduled. Hope spread through the office like sunlight breaking through clouds. People spoke softer, smiled more. Eleanor felt it too. But fear still lived beneath it, because deep down she knew something else. Hope never came without a cost. And somewhere out there, people who benefited from William's silence were paying attention. That night, Eleanor stood by the window, watching headlights move through the dark. She whispered a final prayer before bed. "Please," she said, "let grace be stronger than fear." Outside, the city hummed. Inside, the truth waited, closer than it had ever been. The news did not break all at once. It crept out in pieces, like water finding cracks in a wall. Eleanor noticed it first in the tone of the office. The smiles faded. Voices dropped. Doors closed more often. Jonathan's phone rang without pause. He stopped answering some calls. Others he took behind closed doors, his voice low and controlled, the way it got when he was trying not to show anger. By midday, Eleanor understood why. A headline flashed across a television in the office lobby. "Billionaire accused of meddling in old criminal case." Eleanor's stomach dropped. She stood frozen as the words scrolled beneath the headline. Phrases jumped out at her like sharp objects. Improper influence, conflict of interest, abuse of power. She turned away, heart pounding. Jonathan found her minutes later, his face tight. "They leaked it," he said quietly. "Not the full story, just enough to twist it." Eleanor's voice shook. "I knew this would happen." Jonathan nodded. "So did I." He guided her into a private office and closed the door. "Listen to me. This doesn't change what we're doing." Eleanor looked at him, fear flooding her chest. "It could shut everything down." "Yes," Jonathan said honestly, "if we let it." Outside the door, raised voices echoed down the hall. Jonathan's legal team gathered quickly. Papers were spread across the table. Screens showed breaking news updates. "They're framing it as a vanity project," one advisor said. "A rich man trying to play savior." Another added, "They're questioning Eleanor's credibility." Eleanor flinched. Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Leave her out of this." "They won't," the advisor said. "She's the weak point." Eleanor's hands trembled. She pressed them together, grounding herself. Jonathan looked at her. "You can step back," he said gently. "I won't think less of you." Eleanor stared at him. For a moment, the old instinct screamed at her to run, protect him, disappear, take the blame alone. The same instinct that had ruined her life once before. She swallowed hard. "No," she said quietly. "I won't run again." Jonathan nodded, something like pride flickering in his eyes. That afternoon, another blow landed. The parole board announced the hearing was being reviewed due to external pressure. Eleanor felt the words hit her like a punch. Reviewed. Not cancelled. Not approved. Just stalled. Jonathan slammed his hand on the desk once, then steadied himself. "They're buying time," he said, "hoping we give up." Eleanor shook her head, tears rising. "They're going to take it away again." Jonathan stepped closer. "Not if we keep moving." But even as he spoke, his phone buzzed again. This time, his face changed when he read the message. "What is it?" Eleanor asked. Jonathan hesitated. "My board." Eleanor's heart sank. "They want you to stop." "Yes," Jonathan said. "They're worried about the foundation, donors, public trust." Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. "I've ruined everything." Jonathan grabbed her hands firmly. "No, the truth is what's shaking them, not you." He took a deep breath. "But I need to be honest with you. This is going to get ugly." As if on cue, another headline appeared online. Sources question motives of homeless witness. Eleanor's chest tightened. They're calling me a liar again. Jonathan's eyes burned. Let them. The rest of the day blurred together. Meetings, calls, statements drafted and rejected. Eleanor stayed in a small side room, listening to the storm build around her. By evening, Jonathan looked exhausted. They're moving faster than I expected, he admitted. Someone very high up wants this buried. Eleanor nodded slowly. That's my fault. Jonathan shook his head. No, that's their fear. He paused, choosing his words carefully. We need to consider your safety. Eleanor's pulse quickened. What do you mean? Jonathan lowered his voice. The investigator confirmed it. The man you saw near the courthouse. He's been asking questions. Eleanor's breath caught. About me? Yes. Her old fear rushed back in full force, the kind that made her bones feel hollow. Jonathan continued. He hasn't approached you yet, but the pattern is familiar. Eleanor stood abruptly. Then I have to go. Jonathan looked startled. Go where? Anywhere but here, she said. If I disappear, they'll stop pushing. They'll leave you alone. Jonathan's voice rose. That's not happening. Eleanor's eyes filled. It worked before. Jonathan grabbed her shoulders gently. It destroyed you before. Eleanor shook her head, panic rising. I can't watch this happen again. Jonathan's voice softened. You're not alone anymore. But Eleanor wasn't listening. The old survival instinct was screaming louder than reason. That night, as the office emptied and rain began to fall, again, Eleanor packed quietly. She folded the clean clothes. She left the letter to William on the table, unfinished. Her hands shook as she zipped the bag. I'm sorry, she whispered to the empty room. She left a short note for Jonathan. Thank you for believing me. Please don't follow me. This is the only way I know how to protect you. She slipped out through a side exit while the city slept. Across town, Jonathan sat alone in his office, staring at the city lights, unaware of what she had done. By the time he realized Eleanor was gone, the night had swallowed her whole. And once again, just when hope felt closest, everything fell apart. Jonathan realized Eleanor was gone just after midnight. At first he thought she had stepped out for air. She often did when the noise in her head became too loud. He waited. He checked his phone. He told himself not to panic. But when he knocked on the door of the side office and found it empty, something cold settled in his chest. Eleanor! He called softly. No answer. The room looked untouched at first glance. Then he noticed what was missing. The extra coat, the small bag, the folded sweater she always kept close. His heart sank. Jonathan picked up the note from the desk. His hands tightened as he read it. Thank you for believing me. Please don't follow me. This is the only way I know how to protect you. For a long moment, he couldn't breathe. It felt like being punched in the same place twice, 10 years apart. She thinks she's saving me, he whispered to the empty room. He sat down slowly, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Outside, rain tapped against the windows in a steady rhythm, like a clock counting down something he couldn't see. Jonathan called his head of security immediately. She's gone, he said. Find her. The response came quick. We're already checking cameras. Minutes stretched into an hour. No trace, no clear direction. Eleanor had vanished the way she always did, quietly, without leaving footprints. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face. For the first time since this began, doubt crept in. Had he pushed too hard? Had he put her in danger? Had hope been a mistake? His phone buzzed again. This time it was his lawyer. They've done it, the lawyer said grimly. The parole board has officially postponed the hearing. No new date. Jonathan closed his eyes. Another call followed. Then another. Donors were concerned. The board was deeply troubled. Advisors urged him to distance himself from the case, for now. Jonathan listened, said little, and ended each call the same way. I won't. By morning, the media storm had grown. Headlines painted him as reckless. Commentators questioned his judgment. Some even hinted that the old assassination rumor had been invented to gain sympathy. Jonathan turned off the television. He stood alone in his office as daylight crept in, feeling the full weight of the fall. Eleanor was gone. William was still in prison, and the truth was being buried again. He walked to the window and looked out at the city. 10 years ago, someone else had paid the price so he could walk free. This time, he refused to let that happen. Jonathan straightened his shoulders. He picked up his phone and made one call. Release everything, he said. All of it. The evidence, the footage, my involvement. Don't soften it. There was a pause on the line. So that could destroy you? Jonathan's voice was calm. Then let it. He hung up and turned back to the city, his reflection staring at him in the glass. He finally understood what Eleanor had lived with all these years. Doing the right thing did not feel good. It felt lonely. But it was the only way forward. Somewhere out there, Eleanor was walking alone again, believing she had failed. Jonathan made a silent promise. I will not let your sacrifice be wasted. The fall had come, but he wasn't done standing up. Jonathan did not sleep that night. Morning came grey and quiet, like the city itself was holding its breath. He stood by the window of his office, watching the streets below fill with people who had no idea a life had slipped through his hands only hours earlier. Eleanor was gone, and this time he refused to accept it. He turned from the window and picked up his phone again. His voice was steady, but something sharp lived underneath it now. Expand the search, he told his security chief. Shelters, churches, transit stations, anywhere she might go. Yes, sir. Jonathan grabbed his coat and headed out, ignoring the calls that buzzed in his pocket. None of them mattered more than this. He started where Eleanor had always felt safest. The shelters were already busy when he arrived. Volunteers moved between rows of chairs, offering coffee and blankets. Jonathan spoke quietly to the staff, showing a photo Eleanor had reluctantly allowed him to take days earlier. Most shook their heads. Then one woman paused. She came through last night, she said. Didn't stay long. Said she was looking for some place familiar. Jonathan's chest tightened. Did she say where? The woman thought. She asked about the Veterans Center on Maple Street. Jonathan thanked her and left immediately. The Veterans Center sat between a closed diner and a hardware store that hadn't changed in decades. The building was old but cared for. An American flag hung out front, faded but proud. Jonathan pushed the door open. Warm air and the smell of coffee wrapped around him. A group of elderly men sat at a table playing cards. A woman in her 70s laughed loudly at something one of them said. And then he saw her. Eleanor stood near the back of the room, handing out cups of coffee. Her coat was still the same worn one, but her posture was different. Straighter, like she had decided something. Jonathan stopped, afraid that if he moved too fast, she would disappear again. She looked up and saw him. For a moment, fear flashed across her face. Then shame. Then resignation. You shouldn't be here, she said softly as he approached. Jonathan shook his head. I should have been here sooner. The veterans watched them with quiet interest, their eyes kind but sharp. Eleanor set the coffee pot down. I told you not to follow me. Jonathan's voice was gentle but firm. You told me not to. You didn't ask me to." Eleanor swallowed. "They were coming for you." Jonathan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "And you thought running would stop that?" Eleanor looked away. "It worked once." Jonathan shook his head. "It cost you everything once." She closed her eyes, tears slipping free. "I couldn't watch it happen again." Jonathan reached out, stopping just short of touching her. "Eleanor, listen to me. I don't want to be protected. I want to be faithful." She opened her eyes. "Faithful to what?" "The truth," he said. "And to you." One of the veterans cleared his throat. "Mom," he said gently, "you've got a good heart, but even soldiers don't fight alone." Eleanor glanced at him, startled. Another veteran nodded. "Running keeps you alive," he said. "Standing together changes things." Eleanor's shoulders trembled. Jonathan finally placed a hand over hers, steady and warm. "I released everything last night," he said. "All the evidence, all the risk. There's no hiding anymore." Eleanor stared at him. "You did what?" "I told the truth," Jonathan said simply. "Publicly." Her breath caught. "That could ruin you." Jonathan smiled faintly. "I think it might finally save me." Eleanor shook her head slowly, overwhelmed. "I didn't come here to be found." Jonathan met her eyes. "Then maybe you came here to remember who you are." The room was quiet now. Every veteran watched, understanding, more than words could explain. Eleanor looked around, then back at Jonathan. "If I come back," she whispered, "there's no turning away again." Jonathan nodded. "I know." She took a long breath. "Okay." The word was small, but it carried weight. Jonathan felt something loosen in his chest. They walked out of the Veterans Center together, not rushed, not hidden. Outside, the sky had begun to clear, pale light breaking through the clouds. Eleanor paused on the sidewalk. "I'm still scared," she admitted. Jonathan looked at her. "So am I." She nodded. "Then let's be scared together." Jonathan smiled. For the first time since the fall, he felt something solid beneath his feet. The search was over. The stand was about to begin. The prison visiting room felt smaller than Eleanor remembered. The chairs were the same hard plastic. The table was the same dull grey. The walls still carried the quiet weight of years spent waiting. But this time, Eleanor walked, in knowing she would not leave with the truth still locked inside her. Jonathan stayed back, giving her space. This moment was not his. The door buzzed, and William entered. He looked tired, but when he saw Eleanor, his face softened into that same gentle smile she had loved her whole life. "Ellie," he said, "you came back." "Yes," she replied, her voice shaking. "I promised." They sat across from each other. William studied her face, his brow furrowing. "You look different," he said, "lighter and heavier at the same time." Eleanor swallowed hard. "I need to tell you something." William nodded. "I'm listening." Her hands trembled as she placed them on the table. For a moment, fear threatened to pull her back into silence. Then she remembered Jonathan's words, faithful to the truth. "I lied," she said. William blinked. "About what?" "About everything," Eleanor whispered. "That day, the fight, the trial." William leaned back slightly, confusion spreading across his face. "Ellie, I lied on the stand," she said, tears filling her eyes. "I said you started it. I said things that weren't true." The words fell between them like broken glass. William stared at her, stunned. "Why?" Eleanor's chest tightened. "Because they threatened us. They threatened you. They threatened our sister. And because I overheard something." She told him then, about the stairwell, the voices, the plan to kill a powerful man that same day. She told him how the chaos of the fight had saved a life without either of them knowing it. William listened in silence, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "They said if I told the truth," Eleanor continued, "you would still go to prison, and more people would get hurt. I thought I was choosing the lesser evil." Her voice broke completely. "I thought I was saving someone. I didn't know how to save you too." William looked down at his hands. A long, heavy silence filled the room. Finally, he spoke. "I knew something was wrong," he said quietly. "I just didn't know what." Eleanor cried openly now. "I'm so sorry. I know I don't deserve forgiveness." William looked up at her, eyes shining. "Ellie," he said gently, "do you know what kept me going in here?" She shook her head. "Believing you loved me," he said. "Believing you wouldn't hurt me on purpose." Eleanor sobbed. "I never would." "I know," William said. He reached across the table and took her hands. "You were scared, and you were young, and you were trying to protect people." Eleanor shook her head. "I destroyed your life." William squeezed her hands. "You didn't destroy it. They did." She looked at him in disbelief. "I lost years," William continued. "But I didn't lose my soul, and neither did you." Eleanor searched his face. "You forgive me?" William nodded. "I forgave you a long time ago. I just didn't know why I was forgiving you." A guard cleared his throat, signaling time. William stood, still holding Eleanor's gaze. "Whatever happens next," he said, "we face it together." Eleanor nodded, tears streaming. "Together." As William was led away, Eleanor remained seated, shaking, emptied and full all at once. Jonathan approached quietly. "Are you okay?" Eleanor wiped her face and stood straighter than she had in years. "Yes," she said, "for the first time. Yes." The truth was finally spoken, and instead of breaking them, it had begun to heal them. The truth erupted into the public eye faster than Eleanor and Jonathan had anticipated. The media, initially skeptical, now buzzed with curiosity and shock. The story spread like wildfire, Jonathan's release of the evidence, Eleanor's confession, and the years of cover-ups. The pressure was immediate. Jonathan stood before the cameras, a calm presence amid the storm. He didn't flinch when asked the hard questions, didn't back down when they tried to pin blame on him. His answer was always the same. The truth matters, no matter the cost. Eleanor stayed in the background, her heart pounding as she watched the world react. Some people still doubted her, some even vilified her, but many others began to rally around her, seeing her not as a villain, but as someone who had paid the price for fear and love. Within hours, the parole board announced it would reconsider William's case. The walls built by years of corruption began to crack, piece by piece. Jonathan met with his legal team late into the night. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, he believed it could bring change. And as the sun set on the city, Eleanor felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. The day of the hearing arrived with a quiet kind of anticipation. Jonathan sat in the front row, his face set, but his hands clenched tightly on his lap. Eleanor stood beside him, her heart racing, her mind flooded with the weight of the truth. The courtroom was filled with voices and whispers, but once the judge entered, everything went silent. The evidence was laid out clearly. The new footage, the witness statements, the documents that had been buried for so long. The truth hung in the air, undeniable, impossible to ignore. William's case was reviewed with unprecedented attention. For the first time in a decade, a sense of fairness filled the room. After a tense silence, the judge stood. "The verdict is overturned," she declared. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. The words she had waited for, prayed for, had finally come. William's conviction was rescinded. Outside the courtroom, the reporters gathered, but for once, Eleanor didn't feel the weight of their gaze. Jonathan stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. William was free. The years of pain, fear, and silence had led them here, to this moment of justice. For the first time, they could finally breathe. William was released 3 days later, stepping out of the prison gates with the world around him still unfamiliar. He had spent over 10 years locked away, but now, as the sun warmed his face, it felt like he was seeing everything for the first time. Eleanor waited for him by the gate, her hands trembling with anticipation. When she saw him, her heart swelled, and for the first time in years she felt like she could breathe again. "Ellie," William said, his voice hoarse but full of warmth. They embraced tightly, as if the years between them could be erased in that moment. Jonathan stood nearby, watching them, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. The three of them walked away from the prison together, not knowing exactly where the future would take them, but feeling, for the first time, like they could face it together. The world outside felt different, no longer full of shadows and secrets, but of possibilities. Eleanor smiled, through her tears. "We're free," she whispered. Jonathan nodded, looking at them both. "Yes, we are." And as they walked into the future, hand in hand, the weight of the past began to lift, replaced by hope and the promise of new beginnings. Weeks passed, and the dust began to settle. The media storm faded, though the whispers of Eleanor and Jonathan's journey lingered in public conversations. Their story became one of redemption, not just for William, but for everyone involved. The truth, once buried, had risen, and with it came healing. William slowly adapted to life outside the walls. The world had changed, but he was still the same man, driven by a quiet strength, determined not to let his years in prison define him. Eleanor stayed by his side, not as a protector, but as an equal. Together they built a new rhythm, one that included both the scars of the past and the promise of the future. Jonathan, too, had changed. He threw himself into his work with a renewed purpose, not driven by power or wealth, but by a deep desire to make things right. The foundation he had spent years building now focused on justice reform, fighting to ensure that what had happened to William would never happen to anyone else. One evening, as the sun began to set, Jonathan and Eleanor sat on the steps of the house, watching the city below. The air was warm, and the world felt lighter than it had in years. "I never thought we'd get here," Eleanor said softly, leaning her head on Jonathan's shoulder. "Neither did I," Jonathan replied, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying a quiet joy. "But we did." Eleanor smiled. "We did." The past would never be erased, but it no longer held them captive. In the truth, they had found freedom. Freedom to live, to heal, and to move forward. For the first time in a long time, they could breathe. "Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe. And tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart."